Can you take my baby twins? They're in danger from my abusive husband. A mother begged a Hell's Angel. Rain hammered the tin roof of Tank's custom cycles like 1,000 tiny fists, each drop finding its own rhythm against the metal. Tank Morrison pulled the last bay door shut and threw the bolt, listening to the storm build outside. Thunder rumbled somewhere over the hills, low and long, like something big rolling over in its sleep. He wiped his hands on a shop rag stained black with years of grease and oil, then walked back toward his workbench to grab his jacket. The single bulb hanging above the bench cast a warm yellow circle of light, the only bright spot in the dim garage. Everything else sat in shadow. Chrome pipes and half-finished engines gleamed faintly where the light touched them. Tank paused, like he did most nights, in front of the small corkboard nailed to the wall above his tools. 3 photographs hung there, curling at the edges from age and humidity. In the first one, a young woman with Tank's same dark eyes laughed at the camera, her arm thrown around a much younger Tank, both of them squinting against summer sunlight. In the second, that same woman held a baby who wasn't hers, some niece or cousin's kid, her face soft with a kind of joy Tank hadn't seen in years. The third photo was older, faded almost yellow. Angela at 16, sitting on the porch steps of their childhood home, a book in her lap and her bare feet tucked under her. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story Tank's sister. Gone 11 years now. He reached up and touched the corner of the oldest photo, the way he always did. It was a small habit, barely a thought, but it grounded him every single night before he locked the shop and rode home to his empty apartment. "Still here, kid," he muttered, voice low and rough. Angela had been gentle. Too gentle for the world, maybe. She'd married a man who smiled pretty in front of company and turned into something else behind closed doors. Tank had been overseas then, stationed halfway around the world, sending letters home that arrived too slow to matter. By the time he got back, by the time he understood what had really been happening in that little house with the blue shutters, it was already over. Angela was gone, and the man who did it walked around free for 2 more years before karma, or maybe just bad luck, finally caught up to him in a bar fight that left him just as dead as she was. It wasn't justice. Not really. Tank had learned a long time ago that justice was a word people used when they wanted to feel better about things that could never actually be fixed. He'd carried that failure every day since. The not knowing, the not being there. It sat in his chest like a stone that never got smaller, no matter how many years passed or how many miles he put between himself and that blue house. Thunder cracked again, closer this time, rattling the windows in their frames. Tank glanced toward the front of the shop, where rain sheeted down the big glass door in silver ropes, blurring the streetlights outside into smeared halos. He grabbed his jacket off the hook and shrugged into it, the leather creaking with the familiar sound of 1,000 rides. His keys jingled in his pocket as he reached for his helmet sitting on the counter. That was when he heard it. A fist against glass. Frantic. Desperate. Tank froze, helmet halfway to his head, and looked up. Through the rain-streaked glass of the front door, a shape stood hunched against the storm, pounding both hands against the pane like the world was ending. A woman. Young, soaked to the bone, her hair plastered flat against her face. She had something in each arm, bulky shapes that she clutched against her chest like they were the only things keeping her upright. "Please!" Her voice cut through the rain, muffled but unmistakable, raw with terror. "Please, somebody, help me!" Tank's whole body went still, old instincts sharpening underneath the surprise. He set the helmet down slowly, eyes locked on the door. The woman shifted, and the streetlight behind her caught the shapes in her arms for just a second. Not bags, not groceries, infant carriers, 2 of them. Tank's heart slammed once, hard, against his ribs. "Please!" she screamed again, pounding harder now, desperate like she thought he might just walk away. "Please! You have to help me!" Tank crossed the shop floor in 3 long strides and threw the bolt back. The door swung open and the storm rushed in with the woman, rain and wind and the smell of wet pavement all tangled together. She stumbled over the threshold, arms shaking under the weight of the two carriers. Up close, Tank could see she was younger than he'd first thought, maybe late 20s, with a bruise blooming yellow and green along her jaw that no amount of makeup had quite covered. Her eyes were wide, darting past him into the shop, then back out toward the parking lot, then down to the phone clutched in her right hand like a live grenade. "Please," she said again, quieter now that she was inside but no less desperate. "Please, I need your help." "Ma'am, you need to breathe," Tank said, keeping his voice low and even, the same tone he used on spooked animals and green recruits back in the day. "Come in. Sit down. Tell me what's going on." "There's no time to sit down." She set the carriers on the floor with a gentleness that seemed to cost her everything she had left, like her arms wanted to keep holding them forever, but her mind knew she couldn't. She knelt beside them, brushing wet hair back from two small sleeping faces. Twins, a boy and a girl, both wrapped in blankets gone damp at the edges, both impossibly small. "Can you take my babies, please, just for a little while? They're in danger. My husband, he's—" Her voice broke. She pressed a fist to her mouth like she was trying to hold the words back, but they came anyway. "He's going to hurt them, or hurt me in front of them. I don't know anymore. I just know I can't let him find us." Tank's chest tightened. He looked down at the babies, at their tiny fists curled up near their faces, and something old and buried cracked open inside him. He saw Angela's face for just a second, superimposed over this stranger's, the same terror, the same desperation, the same plea that had come too late for his sister and might still be in time for this woman. "Who's your husband?" Tank asked, even though some part of him already knew this wasn't the kind of story that had an easy answer. "It doesn't matter right now." She glanced at her phone again, thumb swiping across the screen with shaking fingers. "Please, I don't have time to explain everything. I need you to trust me. Lady, I don't even know your name. Sarah." She looked up at him, and for the first time, he saw not just fear in her eyes, but something fierce underneath it. Something that had decided a long time ago that her children mattered more than her own safety. "Sarah Miller. And these are my babies, Lily and Liam. Please, I've seen you around town. People say you're a good man under all this." She gestured vaguely at his leather jacket, his tattoos, the patches on his vest. "I don't have anyone else. My family cut me off years ago. I have nowhere else to go and no time left to find somewhere." Tank crouched down slowly, getting eye level with the carriers, studying the twins' faces like he might find some kind of answer there. They looked so peaceful, so unaware of the storm raging around them, both inside the shop and out. "How much time do we have?" he asked. Sarah's eyes snapped to her phone screen, and her whole body went rigid. 20 minutes, she whispered. "Maybe less. He's got an app. He tracks my phone, always has, ever since we got married. If I don't move soon, he'll know exactly where I am, and he'll know exactly where I left them if I don't hurry." 20 minutes. Tank's mind raced through everything that could go wrong, every reason a smart man would say no. He didn't know this woman. He didn't know her husband. Didn't know what kind of danger he might be walking into. Didn't know the first thing about caring for infants. But he knew what happened when good men hesitated, when the world moved too slow to save the people who needed saving most. He'd lived with that lesson for 11 years. "Give them here," Tank said, and his voice came out rougher than he meant it to. Sarah's face crumpled with relief and grief all at once. She lifted the carriers, one at a time, pressing a shaking kiss to each small forehead before she handed them over. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you. Thank you." Tank hooked one carrier handle over each forearm and carried them through the shop like they were made of glass, weaving past the lift and the tool chests toward the little back room where he kept a cot for late nights and a coffee pot that never turned off. Liam started fussing halfway there, a thin, warbling cry that climbed fast into something bigger. Tank froze mid-step. Just set them down, Sarah said, right behind him, her voice steadier now that she had a job to do. On something flat. The carriers rock a little. That usually helps. He set them on the workbench he'd cleared of parts that morning, nudging aside a socket wrench with his boot. Lily woke up at the sound of her brother crying, and within seconds both twins were going, a duet of wails that filled the little room and bounced off the metal shelving. Okay. Tank's hands hovered over the carriers like he was afraid to touch anything. Okay, what do I do? Sarah was already moving, pulling a diaper bag off her shoulder that he hadn't even noticed her carrying, dropping it onto the workbench and unzipping it with fingers that shook but knew exactly where everything was. There's formula already mixed in these bottles. They're good for a few hours if you keep them cool. Diapers are in this pocket, wipes are here. She yanked zippers, pointed at pockets, talking fast. Like if she slowed down even a little, the fear would catch up to her. Liam eats more than Lily. Don't let him fool you into thinking he's still hungry when he's really just gassy. You have to burp him longer. Lily will only sleep on her side, not her back. She just won't settle otherwise. Side, not back, Tank repeated, trying to hold on to it. They go down around 7, they'll wake up twice in the night, maybe 3 times. Sarah pulled a bottle out and pressed it into his hand before he could protest, closing his thick, grease-stained fingers around it like she was passing off something sacred. Liam first. He'll scream the loudest till he gets fed. Tank looked down at the bottle in his hand, then at the 2 red-faced, screaming infants on his workbench, and felt something like panic rising in his own chest for the first time since he'd walked into a war zone half his life ago. Sarah, I don't know the first thing about. You'll figure it out. She said it fast, almost sharp, and when he looked up, he saw why. Tears were running freely down her face now, cutting through the rain, still clinging to her skin. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the twins, drinking in the sight of them like she was trying to memorize their faces before someone made her forget. Lily. Liam. She said their names soft, like a prayer. She leaned down and kissed each small forehead again, lingering this time, her lips trembling against their skin. Mommy loves you. Mommy will be back. I promise. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She flinched like she'd been struck. That's him, she whispered. Checking in. I have to go. I have to keep moving or he'll know something's wrong. Sarah, wait. Tank shifted the bottle to one hand and reached out, not sure what he meant to say, only that some part of him didn't want to let this terrified, brave woman walk back out into the storm alone. Where will you go? How do I reach you? I'll call. Burner phone. I'll get one. I'll call you at the shop number. She was already backing toward the door, her whole body angled toward escape, even as her eyes stayed locked on her children. Please, please just keep them safe. That's all I need. Just keep them safe. I will, Tank said, and he meant it with a certainty that surprised him. I swear it. Sarah nodded once, hard, like she was sealing the promise between them. Then she turned and ran, out through the shop, out the front door, back into the rain and the dark, and the 20 minutes that were probably already gone. The door banged shut behind her, and the sound of the storm swallowed up the sound of her footsteps. Tank stood alone in the back room, a bottle in one hand, 2 crying babies on his workbench, and the weight of what he'd just promised pressing down on him harder than anything had in 11 long years. Liam's cry hit a new pitch, and Tank fumbled the bottle, almost dropping it, before he got the nipple close to the baby's mouth. The crying stopped so fast it was like someone had flipped a switch, replaced by frantic little sucking sounds, and Tank let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. 1 down. Lily was still screaming on the workbench next to her brother, her small fists balled up tight, face red as a fire truck. Okay, Tank muttered to himself, bouncing Liam a little the way he'd seen people do in movies. Okay, 1 at a time, that's fine, that's fine. He needed help. That much was obvious. He was a mechanic who fixed motorcycles for a living, not a man who knew the first thing about babies. And these 2 tiny humans depended on someone getting this right. He balanced Liam in the crook of one arm, grabbed his phone off the workbench with his free hand, and dialed Big Mike's number with his thumb, the phone buzzing against his ear while Lily kept wailing beside him. Mike picked up on the second ring, his deep voice rough with the sound of a television playing somewhere behind him. "Tank? What's up, man? You never call this late." "Mike." Tank cleared his throat, tried to find words that wouldn't make him sound insane. "I need you to come to the shop. Like now." "Everything okay? You sound weird." Tank looked down at Liam, who'd stopped drinking and was staring up at him with wide, dark eyes like he was trying to figure out who this stranger was. Lily's crying had gone hoarse, hiccuping between wails. "There's a woman. Came in tonight. Husband's beating on her. She left me her babies. Twin babies, Mike. Infants. I got one crying so hard I don't know what to do, and I'm holding a bottle like it's a live grenade." There was a pause on the other end, long enough that Tank thought the call had dropped. Then Mike said, "Twins? How old?" "I don't know. Small. Couple months, maybe." "Okay." Mike's voice had changed, gone flat and steady, the way it did when trouble was brewing at the clubhouse and he needed to think fast. "You still got them both breathing?" "Yeah, obviously." "Then you're already doing better than you think." Tank heard shuffling on the other end, a door opening, Mike's voice moving away from the phone for a second. Carla, get up, we got a situation." Muffled words back and forth, a woman's voice rising with questions. Then Mike was back. "Carla did 10 years in the NICU before she quit to raise Jenny. She's already pulling on her shoes. We're coming." Tank felt something loosen in his chest, just a fraction. "Mike, I don't want to drag the club into this, if it's going to cause problems. This is dangerous. Her husband's already looking for her, and now for these babies too, and I don't know how bad this could get." "Tank." Mike said his name like a correction. "You've ridden with me 12 years. You pulled me out of that ditch on Route 9 when I flipped my bike and everybody else just kept riding. You think I'm gonna sit home watching television while you're standing there, holding a screaming baby by yourself?" Lily's cries spiked again, sharp and furious, and Tank shifted the phone against his shoulder so he could reach over and touch her small back, the way he'd seen Sarah do without even thinking about it. To his surprise, the touch alone seemed to calm her a little, her cries dropping down to hiccups. "There's 2 of them," Tank said, quieter now. "Both girls and boys, I mean, one of each. I don't even know what I'm doing, Mike." "Nobody knows what they're doing the first time," Mike said. "You'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. I'm calling Preacher too. He's got that daughter. She just had a kid last year. There's gotta be baby stuff still sitting around his garage. Diesel's probably still up. I'll grab him on the way." "Diesel?" Tank almost laughed despite everything, picturing the 6'4", fully tattooed biker anywhere near an infant. "You sure that's a good idea? Diesel's got a soft spot a mile wide under all that ink, you know that." Tank heard keys jingling, a door slamming, Mike's boots hitting pavement outside. "Give us 40 minutes. Just keep them alive till we get there." "Copy that," Tank said, and for the first time since Sarah had burst through his door, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't in this alone. Within the hour, headlights swept across the shop's front windows, one after another, engines rumbling low in the parking lot outside. Car doors slammed, boots hit gravel. And through the front door came Big Mike, arms loaded with a folded portable crib, Carla right behind him with a canvas bag marked with a faded hospital logo. And behind them, Preacher and Diesel, hauling in boxes of diapers, bottles, and blankets like men reporting for the most important job of their lives. Carla took charge the second she stepped through the door, and Tank had never been so glad to hand off responsibility to another human being in his whole life. "Give her here," Carla said, already reaching for Lily before her coat was even off. She had the baby up against her shoulder in one smooth motion, patting a steady rhythm on her back that Tank could never have managed in 100 years of trying. Lily's cries wound down to soft hiccups within a minute, like she'd been waiting her whole short life for someone who actually knew what they were doing. "How'd you do that?" Tank asked, still bouncing Liam, who had finished his bottle and now stared up at the ceiling lights with heavy eyelids. 10 years, honey. You learn a few tricks. Carla settled into an old folding chair someone had dragged over, rocking Lily with the ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. The garage looked nothing like it had 2 hours ago. Preacher had backed his truck right up to the bay doors and unloaded box after box, a bassinet, a stack of tiny onesies still folded from his daughter's old nursery, a diaper bag with cartoon elephants on it that looked absurd next to the tool chests and motorcycle parts scattered around the shop. Diesel had set up the portable crib in the corner. Following instructions, Carla shouted at him from across the room, his big hands fumbling with the little plastic clips meant for someone with far smaller fingers. "This ain't right," Diesel muttered, wrestling with a crib leg that refused to click into place. "Man's got hands built for wrenches, not this delicate business." "Keep at it," Preacher said, not even looking up from where he sat with a laptop balanced on his knees, already typing notes about what they'd need to figure out legally, what protections Sarah might need. Even now, hours into a night nobody had planned for, his mind was already 3 steps ahead. Babies don't care if your hands are delicate. They care if you show up. Big Mike had taken over diaper duty, which turned out to be the funniest thing Tank had seen in years. The big man held a diaper up like it was a bomb he didn't know how to defuse, turning it over twice before Carla, without even looking, called out, "Tabs go in the back, Mike." "How do you know I got it backward without looking?" "Because you always get it backward the first time. Every new dad does." The word dad hung in the air for a second, and nobody corrected it. Nobody made it weird. It just settled into the garage like it belonged there, like these leather-clad men gathering around 2 tiny strangers was the most natural thing in the world. Tank finally got Liam to sleep, the baby's small body going heavy and warm against his chest, breaths slowing into that peaceful rhythm that made something ache and swell in Tank's chest at the same time. He laid him down gently in the bassinet Diesel had finally managed to assemble, tucking the blanket the way Carla had shown him, folding it snug, but not too tight. "There you go, little man," Tank whispered, stepping back to let Diesel take a turn. Diesel crouched down next to the bassinet, looking about as out of place as a bull in a flower shop with his thick arms covered in faded ink, a skull tattoo peeking out from his collar. But his voice, when he started humming, came out soft and low, a tune that didn't quite match any song Tank recognized, wandering off key every few notes before finding its way back. He rocked the bassinet with one careful finger, back and forth, watching Liam's face like it was the only thing in the world worth watching. "Where'd you learn that?" Tank asked quietly, not wanting to break whatever was happening. Diesel shrugged, still humming, still rocking. "Don't know, just comes out." Tank stood there in the doorway of his own garage, watching this mountain of a biker hum an off-key lullaby to a baby that wasn't his blood, surrounded by men who'd dropped everything at midnight to turn a motorcycle shop into a nursery. Something loosened in his chest, something that had been tight and knotted since the day they'd told him about Angela, since the guilt had settled into his bones and never quite left. For the first time in years, Tank felt the corners of his mouth pull upward into something real. A small smile, a quiet, unfamiliar kind of hope. Morning light came in gray and thin through the garage windows, the kind of light that made everything look tired. Tank hadn't slept. He'd spent most of the night in the folding chair next to the bassinets, watching 2 small chests rise and fall, half convinced that if he looked away for too long, something bad would happen. Big Mike had finally forced him out around 6, telling him Carla wasn't going anywhere, and neither were the babies, and that a man couldn't run on fumes and worry forever. So, Tank drove to the diner on 5th Street, the one with the cracked red booths and coffee that tasted like it had been sitting since Tuesday, to meet Ray. Ray Delgado was already there when Tank walked in, hunched over a laptop in the back corner booth, a cup of black coffee going cold beside him. He looked like he always looked, rumpled shirt, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, the tired eyes of a man who'd spent 20 years finding things people didn't want found. He'd done work for the club before, skip tracing, background checks, the kind of digging that needed someone who knew how to stay quiet. "You look like hell," Ray said, not looking up. "Long night." Tank slid into the booth across from him. "Thanks for meeting me this early. You said it was urgent. When you say urgent, I listen." Ray finally glanced up, studying Tank's face for a second. "This about the woman who called you? Sarah?" Tank nodded. He'd given Ray the basics over the phone last night, enough to get him started. Sarah Miller, her husband, Craig Dalton, 2 infant twins, a woman running scared with nowhere else to go. "I need to know how much danger she's in," Tank said. "And I need to know if there's a way to get her somewhere safe without her husband finding her first." Ray turned the laptop around so Tank could see the screen. "I started digging last night after you called. Wasn't hard to find him. Craig Dalton's not just some guy with a temper, Tank." "What do you mean?" "He's a cop." The words landed heavy, and for a second Tank just stared at the screen, at the photo Ray had pulled up. Dalton in his uniform, clean cut, easy smile, the kind of face that looked trustworthy in a courtroom or on the evening news, the kind of face that made people believe whatever he said. "A cop," Tank repeated. "3rd Precinct. Been on the force almost 10 years, and it gets worse." Ray scrolled down, pulling up another screen, this one filled with names and numbers Tank didn't recognize. "He's got friends, real friends. I'm talking guys in dispatch, a couple of detectives, even somebody up in records. The kind of network that makes a lot of problems disappear quiet-like." Tank felt his stomach drop. "You're telling me he can use the department to find her?" "I'm telling you he already is." Ray leaned forward, voice dropping low even though the diner was mostly empty. "I got a buddy who still works dispatch. He tells me Dalton filed a report last night, says his wife took off with the twins without a word, says he's worried something happened to them." "That's not what happened," Tank said, jaw tightening. "She was running from him. She was scared out of her mind." "I believe you. But that's not what the report says." Ray's eyes were steady, serious. "The report says kidnapping, Tank. He's telling everybody his wife and kids were taken. That means every cop in this city, dirty or not, is going to be keeping an eye out for a woman and 2 babies who match Sarah's description." Tank sat back, the diner around him blurring for a second as the weight of it settled in. This wasn't just an angry husband anymore. This was a man with a badge, a network, and a story already planted that made Sarah the criminal and himself the victim. "So if she goes to the cops for help," Tank said slowly, working it through, "she's walking straight into his hands." "Worse than that." Ray closed the laptop, folding his hands on top of it like he was bracing for what he had to say next. "If anybody finds those twins with you in your club, Tank, it's not going to look like you're protecting them. It's going to look like exactly what he already told everyone happened. A kidnapping." The clubhouse common room smelled like coffee and old leather, the couches sagging in the middle from years of use. Tank stood near the pool table, arms crossed, watching his brothers file in one by one. Big Mike came first, still rubbing sleep from his eyes. Diesel followed, a baby monitor clipped to his belt like it was the most natural thing in the world. Preacher came last, moving slow and thoughtful the way he always did, like every step was a sentence he was still writing in his head. "This better be good," Diesel said, dropping onto the couch. "I just got Liam down for a nap. Kid fights sleep like it owes him money." Nobody laughed. Something in Tank's face told them this wasn't the time. "Sit down," Tank said. "All of you." They did. The room went quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, and somewhere down the hall, the soft crackle of the baby monitor picking up nothing but peaceful breathing. Tank rubbed a hand over his face. He hadn't slept, and it showed, but the tiredness in his eyes was nothing compared to the weight sitting on his chest. "I met with Ray this morning, about Sarah's husband. Craig Dalton, Preacher said. He'd already done some digging of his own, quiet moves through old contacts from his lawyer days. What did Ray find? He's a cop. Tank let that sit for a second. 3rd Precinct, 10 years on the force, and he's got friends everywhere, dispatch, records, a couple detectives who owe him favors. Big Mike's easy expression faded. So he's got eyes everywhere. Worse than that. Tank's jaw tightened. He already filed a report. Says Sarah took off with the twins. Says he doesn't know what happened to them, making himself out to be the worried husband, the victim. Diesel sat up straight. That's a lie. Doesn't matter if it's a lie, Tank said. It's what's on paper. It's what every cop in this city is going to hear if her name comes up. Which means if Sarah goes to the police for help, any police, she's not walking into safety. She's walking into a trap. His trap. The room stayed quiet for a moment, the truth of it sinking in. Preacher was the one who finally spoke, voice calm but serious. So, this isn't a normal domestic situation anymore. Normal channels won't work, not with him wearing a badge. No, Tank said. They won't. She can't call 911 if something happens. She can't walk into a precinct and ask for a restraining order. Every door that's supposed to be open for someone running from a man like that, it's closed for her. He made sure of it. Big Mike leaned forward, elbows on his knees. So what do we do? Tank looked around the room at his brothers. Diesel, with grease under his nails and a soft spot for babies nobody would have guessed. Big Mike, steady as a mountain, married to a woman who knew how to save small lives. Preacher, sharp and careful, already turning legal wheels in his mind. These were the men people crossed the street to avoid. Rough men, tattooed men. Men the world had already decided to be scared of. And right now, they were the only thing standing between 2 sleeping babies and a man with a gun and a badge. We do it ourselves, Tank said. No cops, no system. Because the system's broken for her, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend it isn't. Nobody argued. Nobody hesitated. Tank walked down the hall toward the room they'd turned into a nursery, the others trailing behind him quiet as church. The cribs sat side by side under the soft glow of a nightlight Diesel had picked up from a drugstore 2 nights ago, shaped like a little moon. Lily and Liam were fast asleep, tiny fists curled near their faces, chests rising and falling in that slow rhythm that made the whole world feel still. Tank stood there a long moment, looking down at them. Then he turned to his brothers gathered in the doorway. This club, he said, his voice low and rough but steady as iron, is the only protection this family has left. Not the cops, not the system, us. He looked back at the twins, sleeping peaceful and unaware of everything stacked against them. So, that's what we're gonna be. 2 days later, Tank pulled his truck into the gravel driveway of a small house set back off a county road, hidden behind a wall of pine trees. The place belonged to a friend of Preacher's, a quiet man named Hector who owed the club a favor from years back and asked no questions when Preacher called. It was the kind of house nobody would notice twice. Plain siding, a sagging porch, curtains drawn tight over every window. Exactly what they needed. Tank cut the engine and sat there for a second, hands on the wheel, feeling something close to nerves. He hadn't seen Sarah since that night in the shop, rain dripping off her jacket, her hands shaking as she held out those carriers like they were the only things keeping her alive. 2 days felt like a long time, and also no time at all. He knocked twice, then once more, the signal Preacher had set up. The door opened a crack, chained still, one eye peering through the gap. Then it opened all the way. Sarah looked thinner than he remembered. Her face was pale, dark circles carved under her eyes like bruises that had nothing to do with fists. She wore a borrowed sweatshirt too big for her frame, sleeves pushed up past her wrists. When she saw him, something in her shoulders sagged, like she'd been holding herself up by sheer will and could finally stop. Tank. Her voice cracked on his name. Sarah. He stepped inside, careful, like a man walking into a room full of glass. You doing okay? She let out a laugh that wasn't really a laugh, more like air escaping something too tight. I don't know what okay means anymore. He understood that, more than she knew. The house was small but clean. Hector had left groceries in the fridge and fresh sheets on the bed, little kindnesses that didn't ask for anything back. Sarah led him to the kitchen table and sat down across from him, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had probably gone cold an hour ago. "Is this safe?" she asked. "Really safe. Nobody knows this address, not Craig, not anybody connected to him. Hector's clean, no record, no ties to the club that anybody could trace easy. You're gonna stay here until we figure out the next move." She nodded, but her eyes were somewhere else, somewhere far away. Tank recognized that look. He'd seen it in the mirror more times than he liked to admit, back when Angela was still alive and he still thought there was time to fix things. "Sarah." He waited until she looked at him. "I need you to hear something. This isn't on you. None of this. Not what he did. Not what you had to do to keep them safe. You hear me?" Her chin trembled. She looked down at the table, at her own hands like she didn't recognize them anymore. Tank reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. He'd taken the pictures that morning. Careful, close up, nothing that showed the clubhouse or gave away where the twins were staying. Just Lily in a yellow onesie, gumming on a teething ring shaped like a motorcycle, courtesy of Diesel. Just Liam, red-faced and laughing, caught mid-giggle in Big Mike's massive arms, looking like a doll against all that muscle. He slid the phone across the table. Sarah's hand came up to her mouth. She stared at the screen, thumbs swiping slow across each picture, and Tank watched her whole body change. The tension that had been sitting in her shoulders for weeks, maybe years, cracked open all at once. "They're smiling," she whispered. "Look at them. They're actually smiling." "They're happy, Sarah. Eating good, sleeping good. Diesel's got some kind of gift with them, don't ask me how. Big Mike's wife checks on them every day, makes sure they're healthy. They're loved, I promise you that." The tears came then, silent at first, then shaking her whole frame as she pressed the phone to her chest like she could hold her babies through the glass. She cried the way people cry when they've been strong too long and finally get permission to stop. "Thank you," she managed between sobs. "Thank you. Thank you." Tank reached across the table and covered her hand with his, rough and scarred against her trembling fingers. "Soon as we get security squared away, I'll bring you to see them myself. That's a promise." The clubhouse garage had never smelled like baby powder before. Tank noticed it the second he walked in, that sweet, powdery smell mixing with the oil and rubber that usually filled the place. Somehow it didn't feel wrong. It just felt like something new had folded itself into something old. He was learning fast, whether he wanted to or not. That first morning, he stood at the counter with a can of formula in one hand and a bottle in the other, squinting at instructions like they were written in another language. Big Mike had to show him twice how much water went in before the powder, how to shake it just right so no clumps stuck to the sides. "You're overthinking it," Big Mike said, laughing at Tank's furrowed brow. "It ain't rocket science, Tank. It's baby food." "Everything's rocket science when you're scared of messing it up," Tank muttered. But he kept at it, and by the third day his hands moved without thinking, capping bottles and testing the temperature on his wrist like he'd done it 100 times. Swaddling took longer to get right. Lily hated being wrapped too loose, would wriggle free and start fussing within minutes. Liam was the opposite, screamed if the blanket was too tight around his arms. Tank spent one whole evening with Preacher's old law books pushed aside on the table, practicing folds on a receiving blanket, while Diesel offered unhelpful advice from the couch. "You gotta think of it like tucking in a burrito," Diesel said, not looking up from the game on his phone. "That's not helping." "It's helping me." By the end of the week, Tank could wrap Lily snug enough that she sighed and went still in his arms, and loose enough for Liam that he didn't fight it. Small victories. But they felt big, standing there in the quiet with a baby settling against his chest. The days blurred together. Mornings at the shop, hands black with grease. fixing carburetors and replacing brake lines while his mind kept drifting back to the garage, wondering if the twins were napping okay. If Diesel remembered to check the bottle warmer, afternoons rushing back to relieve whoever had baby duty. Nights were the hardest. The 2 a.m. feedings when the world outside was dead silent except for tiny cries cutting through the dark. He'd shuffle into the makeshift nursery bleary-eyed, scoop up whichever twin was crying, and walk slow circles around the room, murmuring nonsense until they settled. Some nights, it was Lily who needed extra rocking, her little fists curled up near her face, refusing to settle until she heard his heartbeat close enough to trust it. Other nights, it was Liam, red-faced and furious about nothing in particular, needing nothing more than the low rumble of Tank's voice humming some half-remembered tune from his own childhood. He was running on maybe 4 hours of sleep most nights, grease under his nails during the day and formula stains on his shirt by evening, but something in him had shifted. The tiredness didn't feel the same as the tiredness he used to carry, the kind that came from staying busy just to avoid an empty apartment and silence too loud to sit in. One night, long after most of the club had gone home or turned in, Tank found himself alone in the garage with both twins finally quiet, finally asleep. He lowered himself into the old rocking chair somebody had dragged in from Hector's place, the wood creaking under his weight. Lily was tucked against one shoulder, Liam against the other, both small chests rising and falling in that soft, steady rhythm that made his own breathing slow to match theirs. The garage was dim, just one bulb glowing over the workbench, shadows stretching long across the concrete floor. Tank sat there, rocking slow, feeling the weight of 2 small lives resting against him, trusting him without knowing anything about who he was or what he'd lost. He thought about all the nights after Angela died, sitting alone in his apartment with the TV on mute just so the place didn't feel so empty. Years of quiet that ate at him slow, wearing him down until he almost forgot what it felt like to matter to somebody. This wasn't that kind of quiet. Tank closed his eyes, feeling Lily's small fingers curled loose against his shirt, feeling Liam's breath warm against his neck, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, the silence didn't feel lonely at all. Tank checked his phone for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. Preacher's message had come through an hour ago. Sarah's on her way. Tell the boys to keep their eyes open. He walked the perimeter of the clubhouse lot himself, even though he knew Big Mike had already posted 2 guys at the front gate and another 2 near the alley behind the garage. Diesel sat on his bike near the street, helmet off. Just another biker hanging around. Nothing suspicious about that. Except Tank knew Diesel was watching every car that passed, memorizing plates, ready to radio in if anything looked wrong. The safe house wasn't close, and that was on purpose. Sarah had to take 3 different cars to get here, switching at a grocery store parking lot, and then again behind a laundromat, just to make sure nobody was tailing her. Preacher had drilled the plan into everybody's head like a military operation. In a way, it was. Tank stood just inside the garage door when the car finally pulled up. He watched through the gap as Sarah stepped out, wrapped in an old jacket that wasn't hers. Hair pulled back tight, eyes darting side to side before she made herself walk instead of run toward the entrance. He opened the door before she could knock. She stopped when she saw him like she forgot for a second how to move. Then her eyes went past him into the garage, searching. "They're sleeping," Tank said quietly. "Both of them, right through here." Sarah's hands were shaking. He noticed that first, small tremors she was trying to hide by clenching her fists at her sides. Her face was thinner than it had been a week ago. He wondered if she'd been eating at all. He led her past the workbenches, past the tools hanging on the pegboard, into the back room where the twins' makeshift nursery sat glowing with a single nightlight shaped like a moon. 2 bassinets, side by side, blankets tucked just the way Tank had learned to tuck them. Sarah made a sound Tank had never heard a grown person make before. Something between a gasp and a sob, caught halfway in her throat like it hurt to let it out. She moved slow, like she was afraid this was a dream that would break if she rushed it. She knelt down between the 2 bassinets, one hand hovering over Lily, the other over Liam, not touching yet, just looking. "They're bigger," she whispered. "They look bigger." Babies do that, Tank said softly. Growing every day, whether we're watching or not. Sarah reached down and lifted Lily first, cradling her against her chest with a practiced motion that came back instantly, like her body remembered even when her mind had been shattered by fear for weeks. Lily stirred, made a small noise, then settled against her mother's shoulder like she'd never left it. That was when Sarah broke. She sat down right there on the floor, back against the wall, holding Lily close while tears streamed down her face, silent at first, then shaking her shoulders until sobs came out loud and unguarded. Tank crouched down and gently lifted Liam too, setting him carefully into her other arm so she could hold both of them at once. "I'm sorry," Sarah choked out. "I'm sorry, I haven't held them in a week. A whole week." "You don't gotta apologize for that," Tank said, sitting down on the floor across from her, giving her space but staying close. Sarah pressed her face against Lily's soft hair, breathing her in like she was trying to memorize the smell all over again. "Every night I close my eyes and I think about them crying and me not being there. I think about all those years I let myself believe I couldn't leave, that he'd take them from me no matter what I did." Tank stayed quiet, letting her get the words out at her own pace. "I was so scared, Tank." Her voice cracked on his name. "The whole marriage, every single day. I used to check the locks 3 times before bed, even though he was standing right there in the next room. I used to practice what I'd say if he asked me questions, rehearsing answers so I wouldn't slip up and make him angry." She looked up at him, eyes red and raw. "I don't even remember what it feels like not being afraid." Tank let Sarah sit with her babies for a long while before he finally stood up, knees popping from the crouch. He left her there in the soft glow of the moon-shaped nightlight and walked back out into the garage where Preacher was leaning against a tool cabinet, arms crossed, waiting. Preacher didn't look like a lawyer anymore. Hadn't for years. Gray beard down to his chest, leather vest covered in patches, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead most days instead of on his nose. But when he looked at Tank now, there was something sharp behind his eyes, something that hadn't gone soft with all the years of riding. "We need to talk," Tank said. Preacher nodded like he'd been expecting it. "Figured. Come on." They walked to the small office at the back of the shop, the one with the metal desk covered in invoices and motorcycle parts catalogs. Preacher shut the door behind them and dropped into the creaky office chair. Tank stayed standing, arms crossed. 2 wound up to sit. "Dalton's not just some guy we can scare off," Tank said. "He's got a badge. He's got friends in the department. We can't just handle this the way we'd handle somebody else giving Sarah trouble." "No," Preacher agreed. "We can't." "So what do we do?" Preacher rubbed his jaw, thinking. "Before I was riding a bike, I was pushing paper in a courtroom. Family law, mostly. Some criminal defense. I know how these things work. A guy like Dalton, he didn't get where he is without leaving a trail somewhere. Cops like him, the ones who think the badge makes them untouchable, they get sloppy. They think nobody's ever gonna look. So we look. We look," Preacher said. "Financial records first. Guys like Dalton, if he's dirty, there's money somewhere it shouldn't be. Bank accounts, property, maybe stuff under a relative's name if he's smart. We check court records, too. See if any complaints ever got filed against him and quietly disappeared. Guys with connections in a department. Sometimes there's a paper trail even when the higher-ups try to bury it." Tank paced a few steps, then stopped. "What about Sarah? Anything on her? Custody stuff? That adoption he did on the twins?" Preacher's eyes sharpened at that. "That's actually the part I want to look at hardest. Something about how fast that adoption went through bugs me. Adoptions, even simple ones, take time. Home studies, waiting periods, all sorts of paperwork. If Dalton pushed it through quick, maybe using department connections to grease the wheels, that's a problem for him. Adoptions built on fraud or coercion can be undone. That's not something people know, but it's true. You think that's what happened?" "I don't know yet," Preacher said. "That's why I need to pull the records." But if Sarah felt like she had no choice, like she was scared into signing something, a good lawyer could argue that adoption isn't valid at all. And if it's not valid, Dalton's got no legal claim to those kids. None. Tank felt something shift in his chest, a small flicker of hope he hadn't let himself feel yet. So we go after that. We go after everything, Preacher said. But listen to me, Tank. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice going low and serious. This isn't like anything we've dealt with before. Dalton's got a badge and buddies who'll cover for him. If we start digging and he finds out, he's not going to come after us the normal way. He's going to use the law to do it. Fake charges, harassment. He could make our lives hell and call it police work the whole time. I know that. Do you? Preacher's eyes didn't waver. Because I need you to understand this is going to be slow. Records take time to pull, especially quiet-like, without raising flags. And it's going to be dangerous. Every card we play, we gotta be careful, or we hand him the exact excuse he needs to come down on Sarah, on the twins, on all of us. Tank held his gaze. I'm not asking you to do it fast. I'm asking you to do it right. Preacher studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly, like he was satisfied with the answer. All right, then. He reached for a legal pad sitting on the desk and pulled a pen from his vest pocket. I'll start pulling what I can tomorrow morning. Property records, court filings, that adoption paperwork if I can get my hands on it. Give me a few days before you expect anything solid. Take what you need, Tank said. Just find something we can use. Craig Dalton sat in his patrol car in the station parking lot. Engine off, staring at his phone like it might tell him something new if he just looked hard enough. It didn't. The little blue dot that used to mark Sarah's location had gone dark 2 days ago, right around the time she'd stopped answering his calls. He got out of the car and slammed the door harder than he meant to. Inside, the station buzzed with the usual afternoon noise. Officers typing reports, radios crackling, the smell of burnt coffee coming from the break room. None of it registered with Craig. He walked straight past his own desk and into the small records room where Officer Danny Kowalski was pulling files for an unrelated case. I need you to run something for me, Craig said. Danny looked up, startled by how close Craig was standing. Run what? Cell records, Sarah's phone. I need to know the last tower it hit. Danny's eyebrows pulled together. Craig, that's not... We can't just pull cell records without a warrant. You know that. She's my wife, Craig snapped. She took my kids. This isn't some random citizen, Danny. This is a domestic situation. I filed a report. I heard about the report, Danny said carefully. But, Craig, listen. If there's no active warrant, I can't just request carrier data. That's a real paper trail. IT would flag it in a heartbeat. Craig's jaw tightened. He leaned in, voice dropping low. You're telling me you won't help me find my own kids? I'm telling you there's a process, Danny said, backing up half a step. You of all people know that. If this goes through proper channels, it's clean. If you try to shortcut it, it blows up in your face. In my face, too. Craig stared at him, something cold and sharp moving behind his eyes. For a second, Danny thought he might actually take a swing. Then Craig straightened up, ran a hand through his hair, and forced something that might have been a laugh. Yeah, Craig said. Yeah, you're right. Proper channels. He walked away before Danny could say anything else, down the hall toward his own desk, but the anger didn't leave him. It just changed shape, folding itself smaller, hotter, like a coal getting pressed down into something that would burn longer. At his desk, he opened his laptop and pulled up the internal system anyway, the one meant for active cases only. He typed Sarah's name into the search field. Nothing new. He tried the twins' names. Nothing. He sat there for a long moment, fingers hovering over the keys, and then he did something he knew he shouldn't. He opened a case file that wasn't his, an old domestic dispute call from 3 years back that had nothing to do with Sarah and used the access code buried in it to run a location ping on her cell number. The system spun. Then it gave him an error. Insufficient authorization. Craig cursed under his breath and slammed the laptop shut. Across the bullpen, Sergeant Willis glanced over from his own desk. "Everything okay, Dalton?" "Fine," Craig said, too fast, too sharp. Willis didn't look convinced, but he let it go and turned back to his paperwork. Craig watched him for a second, feeling that old, familiar heat rising in his chest, the same heat he used to feel right before he'd corner Sarah in the kitchen and ask her, real quiet, where she'd been all day. He grabbed his jacket off the back of his chair and walked out toward the parking garage, where he knew Officer Ray Pitts would be finishing his shift. Ray worked in the tech division. Ray had access to things Danny didn't. He found Ray by his car, keys already in hand, ready to head home. "Ray," Craig said, stepping into his path. "I need a favor." Ray blinked, surprised. "Craig? What's up?" Craig moved closer, boxing him in against the driver's side door, his voice dropping into something low and urgent. "I need you to ping a cell number for me. Just the tower, that's all I need. Last known location." "Whose number?" "Sarah's." Ray's face shifted, uneasy. "Craig, man, that's not something I can just do off the books. If it's official business, file the request through the right—" "I don't have time for the right channels," Craig said, his voice cracking sharp at the edges, his hand coming up to grip Ray's shoulder, fingers digging in hard enough to make Ray wince. "She's got my kids, Ray. She's got my kids, and I need to know where she is right now." The clubhouse was quiet that evening, the kind of quiet that only comes after a long day of noise. Most of the brothers had gone home or were out in the garage, tinkering with bikes that didn't need tinkering, giving Tank and Sarah a little space. The babies were asleep in the back room, Big Mike's wife having come by earlier to check on them, and now it was just the low hum of the refrigerator and the soft creak of the old couch as Sarah sat down across from Tank. He was cleaning a wrench that was already clean, turning it over in his hands out of habit more than need. Sarah watched him for a while before she spoke. "Can I ask you something?" Tank set the wrench down. "Sure." "Why did you help me?" Her voice was quiet, careful, like she'd been holding the question in for days and wasn't sure she had the right to ask it. "You didn't know me. You didn't know the twins. I burst into your shop with 2 babies and some crazy story, and you just took us in. Why?" Tank was quiet for a long moment. His eyes drifted to the window, to the dark shapes of motorcycles parked outside, but he wasn't really seeing them. He was somewhere else, somewhere further back. "I had a sister," he said finally. "Angela. Younger than me by 4 years. She was—" He stopped, searching for the word. "She was soft. Not weak, just soft. Kind. She trusted people easy, saw the good in them even when the good wasn't really there." Sarah didn't say anything. She just listened, the way people listen when they know something important is coming. "She married a guy named Rick," Tank went on. "Seemed fine at first. Charming, you know, the kind of guy who opens doors and remembers birthdays. Took me a while to see what he really was." His jaw tightened. "By the time I saw it, I was already deployed, overseas. Couldn't do a damn thing from 4,000 miles away except get letters from her that got shorter and shorter, and phone calls where she sounded more and more like she was reading from a script somebody else wrote." He set the wrench down on the table, harder than he meant to. The sound cracked through the quiet room. "I kept telling myself I'd deal with it when I got back. Talk to her, maybe talk to him, scare him straight if I had to. I had time, I thought. I had time." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. "I didn't have time. He killed her 3 months before my tour ended, called it an accident. She fell down the stairs, he said. Cops believed him mostly. Case got closed quiet." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She reached out, not quite touching him, just close enough that he could feel it there. "Tank, I'm so sorry." "I wasn't there," Tank said, and his voice was rougher now, thicker. "That's the thing I can't ever fix. I wasn't there when she needed me. And when you came through that door with those babies, scared out of your mind, I saw her. I saw Angela standing there instead of you. And I thought, not this time, not again, not on my watch." Sarah was crying now, quiet tears sliding down her face, and she didn't bother wiping them away. "I know what it's like," she whispered. "To feel like nobody's coming. Like you're the only one who sees what's really happening, and everybody else just sees the nice guy, the charming guy, the guy with the badge." She let out a shaky breath. "Craig used to tell me nobody would believe me. That he was the good one, and I was the crazy one. And for a long time, I believed him." Tank reached over, his big rough hand covering hers, gentle in a way that surprised them both. "You're not crazy," he said. "You never were. You got out. You did what my sister never got the chance to do." Sarah looked up at him, tears still falling, but something steadier in her eyes now, something like recognition, like she'd found someone who actually understood the weight she'd been carrying alone for so long. "Thank you," she said softly, "for seeing her in me, for not letting it happen again." Tank nodded, unable to speak for a moment, his throat tight with years of grief finally finding somewhere to go. Sarah squeezed his hand, and for the first time since she'd walked through his shop door, she felt like she wasn't fighting this battle alone anymore. Preacher called the meeting for 10 in the morning, which was early for a clubhouse that usually didn't stir until noon. But when Preacher said it was urgent, nobody argued. By 9:45, the main room was full. Tank sat at the head of the long table, Sarah beside him, the twins napping in a portable crib Big Mike's wife had set up in the corner. Diesel leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his tattoos peeking out from under a sleeveless shirt. Big Mike stood near the door like he was guarding it, though nobody was coming. Preacher walked in carrying a thick folder, the kind of folder that meant business. His reading glasses were pushed up on his nose, and there was a look on his face Tank hadn't seen before. Not worry exactly. Something sharper. "I found something," Preacher said, setting the folder on the table. "And you're all going to want to hear this sitting down." "We are sitting down," Diesel said. Preacher ignored him. He opened the folder and pulled out a stack of papers, official looking with stamps and seals and small print that made Sarah's stomach clench just looking at it. "I've been digging through county records," Preacher said. "Property, marriage licenses, court filings. Dalton's got a paper trail a mile long, most of it dirty, most of it exactly what we expected. But then I found this." He slid one document across the table towards Sarah. "Adoption paperwork, filed about 4 months after you and Dalton got married." Sarah stared at it. Her hands were shaking before she even understood why. "Adoption paperwork," she repeated, her voice flat, like she was trying the words out to see if they made sense. "For Lily and Liam," Preacher said gently. "Dalton adopted them, legally, early in the marriage." The room went quiet. Even the twins, asleep in their cribs, seemed to sense it, one of them stirring with a small whimper before settling again. "That can't be right," Sarah said. She picked up the paper, her eyes scanning it too fast to actually read it, just looking for something that would tell her Preacher was wrong. He never adopted them. He never even talked about it like that. He was their dad. That's what he always said. Their dad. "He made himself their legal father," Preacher said. "On paper, which means legally he's got parental rights, real ones, not just the kind he could threaten you with, the kind a court would actually recognize." Sarah's face had gone pale. Tank watched her, saw something shift behind her eyes, some door opening that had been shut for a long time. "Sarah," Tank said quietly, "you okay?" She didn't answer right away. Her hands were still shaking, the paper trembling between her fingers. When she finally spoke, her voice was small, like she was confessing something she'd buried so deep she'd almost convinced herself it wasn't true. "I wasn't always with Craig," she said. Before him, there was someone else, the twins' father, biological father. She swallowed hard. He was worse than Craig, if you can believe that. Worse in different ways. I was pregnant with the twins when I finally got out. Ran without telling anybody where I was going. I didn't have money, didn't have family who'd take my calls. I was scared out of my mind and pregnant and alone. Nobody in the room moved. Even Diesel had gone still. Craig found me a few months after I had them, Sarah went on. He was kind at first, or he seemed kind, said he wanted to help me, wanted to be a father to them since their real father wasn't around and never would be. I thought it was a blessing. Her voice cracked. I didn't know he was building something. A trap. He adopted them early, right after we got married, before I even understood what kind of man he really was. And once it was done, he made sure I knew what it meant. What did he tell you? Tank asked, though some part of him already knew. Sarah looked up, and her eyes were wet, but there was something else there too, something hard and clear underneath the tears. He told me if I ever left him, I'd lose them, she said. Legally, they were his, not mine, not really. He said no court in the world would give custody to a woman with no money, no family, no home, over a police officer with a badge and a house and a good name. Her voice broke completely on the last words. He made sure I knew I couldn't run, not without losing my babies. That's why I stayed as long as I did. Diane Rey's office sat above a bakery downtown, and the smell of fresh bread drifted up through the floorboards, strange and warm against the seriousness of why they were there. Tank had never been in a lawyer's office before. He felt too big for the chair, too rough for the clean lines of the bookshelves and the neat stacks of paper on Diane's desk. Preacher, on the other hand, looked right at home. He'd worn this kind of room before, a long time ago, in a different life. Diane was maybe 50, with silver streaks in her dark hair and sharp eyes that didn't miss much. She'd read through the folder Preacher brought twice already, flipping pages slowly, pausing here and there to underline something with a red pen. "This is good work," she said finally, looking at Preacher. "Real good work. You used to practice?" "A long time ago," Preacher said. "Different life." Diane nodded, like that explained something, and turned her attention to Tank. "You're the one who's been keeping the kids safe?" "Trying to," Tank said. "Good." She set the folder down and folded her hands on top of it. "Let's talk about what this actually means, because I want you both to understand exactly what we're dealing with here." She pulled out the adoption paperwork Preacher had found and laid it flat between them. "On paper, Craig Dalton is the legal father of those twins," Diane said. "That's not nothing. That's real. A court will look at this document and see a man who did everything right, at least according to the law. He filed the paperwork, he went through the process, he's listed as the father on their birth certificates now. If we walked into a courtroom today with nothing but Sarah's story, a judge might sympathize, but sympathy doesn't override legal parental rights. Not by itself." Tank felt his jaw tighten. "So he wins. Just because he filled out some forms?" "Not necessarily," Diane said, and something in her voice sharpened, like she was getting to the part that mattered. "There's a way to challenge an adoption after the fact. It's not common, but it's not impossible either. If we can prove the adoption was coerced, that Sarah didn't consent freely, that she was under duress when she agreed to it, a judge can void the entire thing, wipe it out, like it never happened." "Duress," Preacher repeated, testing the word. "Sarah was isolated," Diane said. "No money, no family, alone with newborn twins, and a man who told her flat out that leaving meant losing her kids. That's not consent. That's control dressed up as fatherhood. But I'll be honest with you both. Proving duress isn't simple. Courts don't like to undo adoptions. They see it as destabilizing for the children involved. We're going to need more than Sarah's word. We need patterns, threats, anything documented. Texts, if she kept any. Witnesses who saw how he treated her. The more we can show this, wasn't a marriage, it was a cage. The stronger our case gets." Tank thought about Sarah's face back at the clubhouse, the way her hands had shaken holding that paper. She'll do whatever it takes, he said. She wants those kids safe more than anything. I believe that, Diane said. And for what it's worth, I believe her story. I've seen enough of these cases to know what desperation looks like versus what's real. This is real. She looked between the two men. I'm willing to file an emergency petition. We'll ask the court to void the adoption based on coercion and grant Sarah full custody, along with a protective order given everything else going on with Dalton's conduct. If the judge agrees to hear it quickly, we could have a hearing within a couple weeks. That fast? Preacher asked. When there's evidence of danger to children, courts move faster, Diane said. But I want to be straight with you both, because I don't sugarcoat things for my clients and I'm not going to start now. She leaned forward, her expression serious. Once we file this and Dalton gets served, he's going to know exactly what's coming for him. His badge, his marriage, his claim on those kids, all of it hanging by a thread. Men like that don't take losing well. He's a cop. He's got resources, connections, people who might tip him off or slow us down. And if he feels cornered, he might do something reckless. I need you both to understand that filing this petition doesn't make things safer right away. It might make things a lot more dangerous before it makes them better. The morning came gray and cold, with fog sitting low over the city like it didn't want to lift. Tank was up before sunrise, standing in the clubhouse garage with a cup of coffee going cold in his hand, watching Lily and Liam sleep in their bassinets. Diesel was already there too, quiet for once, just leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. Today's the day, Diesel said. Today's the day, Tank repeated. Across town, a process server named Ellen Rourke walked into the police station carrying a manila envelope like it weighed nothing at all, though everyone in that building would soon understand it weighed more than anything Craig Dalton had ever carried. She'd done this 100 times. Serve a man his own undoing, watch his face change, walk out before he could say a word that mattered. Craig was at his desk, sorting through paperwork, badge catching the fluorescent light, when she stopped in front of him. Craig Dalton? That's me. You've been served. She set the envelope down and walked away without another word, her heels clicking against the tile floor, and Craig sat there for a second, just staring at it like it might not be real if he didn't touch it. He opened it anyway. The words blurred together at first. Emergency petition, void the adoption, protective order. His name printed clean and official next to phrases like coercion and duress and danger to minors. His hands started shaking before his brain even caught up to what his eyes were reading. Around him, the station kept moving, phones ringing, someone laughing 2 desks over, completely unaware that the ground had just opened up under one of their own. Craig folded the papers back into the envelope, slow and careful, like if he moved too fast, something inside him might break loose. By noon, word had reached the clubhouse through Preacher's contact at the courthouse. Dalton had been served, clean and legal, no way to pretend it hadn't happened. Tank called an emergency meeting in the garage. Every brother who could ride showed up, boots on concrete, faces serious. He's been served, Tank said, which means he knows now. Knows we're coming for the adoption, knows we're coming for his badge eventually too, once Preacher's evidence gets to the right people. A man like that, cornered like that, he's not going to sit quiet. So what's the plan? Big Mike asked. We tighten everything up, Tank said. Sarah's safe house gets a rotation, round the clock, starting tonight. 2 brothers at all times, no exceptions. Clubhouse doubles up too, especially with the twins here. Nobody gets sloppy. Nobody assumes he won't try something stupid, because men like Dalton, when they feel the walls closing in, they stop thinking straight. They just start swinging. Preacher nodded slowly. He's got access to resources most people don't. Cruisers, radios, other cops who might still back him without knowing the full truth yet. We treat this like he's dangerous because he is. By evening, the safe house had 2 bikes parked outside, engines cooling in the driveway, and 2 brothers posted near the windows, quiet and watchful. The clubhouse garage got the same treatment, Diesel and another brother named Ozzy taking the first shift, both of them sitting near the twins' bassinets with a stillness that didn't match their rough exteriors at all. Sarah called Tank that night on the burner phone, her voice tight. "Is it done? Is he served?" "It's done," Tank said. "You did the right thing." "I keep waiting to feel better," she said quietly. "I thought I would feel better." "You will," Tank said. "It just takes time to feel safe again after somebody's had their boot on your neck that long." Across town, in the apartment that used to be theirs, Craig Dalton sat alone in the dark, the envelope torn open on the kitchen table, pages scattered where he'd thrown them in a fit 20 minutes earlier. The silence in the apartment felt like it was pressing in on him, thick and suffocating. He stood up so fast the chair scraped back and toppled over. He grabbed a picture frame off the wall, one from their wedding day, and hurled it across the room. Glass shattered against the far wall, scattering across the floor. "She is not taking my kids," he said out loud. To no one, his voice cracking with rage. "They are mine." He swept his arm across the counter, sending dishes crashing to the tile. A mug shattered, a plate cracked in two. "I built this!" he shouted, kicking over a side table, knocking a lamp to the floor where the bulb popped and died. "I made her a family. I gave those kids a name. And she thinks she can just walk away with them like I don't exist?" He stood in the wreckage of his own apartment, chest heaving, fists clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white. "I will never let her take what's mine," he said, quieter now, more dangerous for how calm it sounded. "Never." 3 days later, the sun actually broke through the clouds, thin and pale. But there. Tank stood in the clubhouse parking lot at 6 in the morning, counting bikes, 42. He counted them twice to make sure. Brothers had come from 3 different chapters, some riding 2 hours through the night just to be here. Word had spread fast once Preacher put the call out. A woman and her babies needed protecting from a dirty cop. That was all it took. No one asked twice. "You sure about this?" Preacher asked, walking up beside him, dressed sharper than usual, a folder tucked under his arm thick with paperwork that had taken him weeks to build. 40 bikes rolling up to a courthouse is going to get attention. "That's the point," Tank said. "Dalton wants to scare her into backing down. He wants her walking in there alone and small. She's not walking in there alone. Not today. Not ever again." Diesel rolled up on his bike, engine growling low, Big Mike right behind him. Both men nodded at Tank, faces set hard and serious, none of the usual joking between them this morning. Sarah came out of the clubhouse office where she'd spent the night, dressed in a plain blue dress Diane Reyes had picked out for her, something that said trustworthy mother, not something that said scared woman running from her husband. Her hands were shaking, but she held her chin up. She stopped when she saw the bikes, all of them. Lined up in rows, chrome catching the morning light, leather jackets and gray beards and tattooed arms as far as she could see. "Tank," she said, voice barely above a whisper. That's a lot of people." "That's your family," Tank said. "Every one of them showed up for you and the twins. Nobody had to ask twice." Sarah pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes filling up fast. She looked over at the twins, already loaded into their car seats in the back of Diane's sedan, the safest place for them, while Sarah rode in a different car surrounded by the convoy. Lily was fussing a little, and Big Mike's wife, Renee, was already leaning in through the window, humming to settle her down. "You don't have to be scared today," Tank said. "You just have to walk in there and tell the truth. We'll handle the rest." Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes quick before the tears could fall and ruin the makeup Diane had helped her put on that morning. "Okay," she said. "Okay." They rolled out at 7:15, engines roaring to life one after another until the whole street shook with the sound of it. Tank rode point, Sarah's car tucked safe in the middle of the formation, Diesel and Big Mike flanking either side of her window the whole way. Preacher rode near the back with his folder strapped down tight in his saddlebag. 40 pages of proof that would end Craig Dalton's world before lunchtime. People on the sidewalks stopped and stared as the convoy rolled through downtown, a river of leather and chrome moving slow and steady toward the courthouse steps. Some folks pulled out their phones to record it. A few old bikers walking past put their fists to their chests in respect as the group rode by, understanding without needing to be told that something serious was happening here. The courthouse came into view, gray stone and tall windows, its steps already crowded with reporters who'd caught wind of the story somehow. Diane was waiting at the base of the steps, her briefcase in hand, watching the convoy pull in with something like relief written plain across her face. Tank parked first, swinging off his bike and moving straight to Sarah's door before she could even open it herself. He held out his hand. She took it. The bikers fell into formation around her without needing to be told how, two lines forming a corridor of leather and steel from the car door all the way up the courthouse steps, Diesel and Big Mike right behind her, Preacher just ahead with his folder held tight against his chest. Sarah stepped out, smoothed down her dress, and looked up at the courthouse doors. Then she started walking, flanked on both sides by dozens of men who had shown up for no reason except that she needed them, her head held high for the first time in years as she climbed the steps toward the doors where Craig Dalton was already waiting inside. The courtroom smelled like old wood and floor polish. Sarah sat at a small table next to Diane Reyes, her hands folded so tight in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. Across the room, Craig Dalton sat beside his own lawyer, wearing his dress uniform like it might save him. His face was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that came from a man who still believed his badge could fix anything. Tank sat in the second row of the gallery, Liam tucked against his chest in a soft blue wrap Renee had shown him how to tie that morning. The baby had fallen asleep somewhere around the second red light, lulled by the rumble of the engines, and he hadn't stirred since. Tank kept one hand flat against the baby's back, feeling the tiny rise and fall of his breathing, and it steadied him more than he expected. Behind Tank sat Diesel, Big Mike, Preacher, and rows of men in leather who had never set foot in a courtroom for anything good in their lives. Today, they sat with their hands folded, quiet as church, because that's what this was to them now. Church. A place where something sacred was about to happen. "Mrs. Dalton," Diane said gently, standing before Sarah, "can you tell the court what happened on the night you fled your home?" Sarah's voice shook at first, but she found it, word by word. She talked about the bruises she'd hidden under long sleeves in July heat. She talked about the nights Craig came home angry, how the anger always seemed to land on her, never anywhere it could be seen. She talked about the fear that lived in her chest every single day, a fear so constant she'd stopped noticing it was there, like breathing. "He told me if I ever tried to leave, he'd take the twins," Sarah said, her eyes finding Tank's for just a second before returning to the judge. "He said the adoption meant they were his, legally his. He said no court would ever give them back to me because I signed the papers myself." "And did you sign those papers freely?" Diane asked. Sarah shook her head. "He told me it was the only way he'd let me stay in the house with them. I was 6 months pregnant when I fled my first husband. I had nowhere to go. Craig said he'd take care of us, but only if the babies were his too. On paper. I didn't understand what that meant until later. By then it was too late to say no." The judge, a woman with silver hair and sharp eyes named Judge Alvarez, leaned forward slightly. "You're saying the adoption was signed under duress?" "Yes, Your Honor," Diane said, stepping in. "And we have the paperwork to prove it." She gestured to Preacher, who rose and carried his thick folder to the bench, 40 pages of financial records, text messages pulled from a cracked phone, and sworn statements from a shelter worker who remembered Sarah crying in her office the night she signed. Judge Alvarez took her time with it. The courtroom sat in silence except for the occasional cough, the soft creak of old wood floors, and once, just once, a tiny sound from Liam as he shifted against Tank's chest. Tank rocked him gently without thinking, the way he'd learned to do 100 times over the last week, and the baby settled again. Craig's lawyer tried to object twice. Both times Judge Alvarez raised a hand and kept reading. Finally, she looked up. Her eyes moved to Sarah first, then across the room to the rows of bikers sitting quiet and still, then finally to Craig Dalton himself. "This adoption," she said, "was obtained through coercion and abuse of a position of trust. That makes it fraudulent under the law, plain and simple. I am voiding it, effective immediately." She struck her gavel down once, sharp and final. "Furthermore, I am granting an emergency protective order against Craig Dalton, barring him from any contact with Sarah Miller or the children, effective immediately, pending the outcome of the criminal investigation into his conduct." For a moment, the courtroom was silent. Then Sarah's hands flew to her mouth, and the sound that came out of her wasn't quite a sob and wasn't quite a laugh, but something in between, something that had been locked inside her chest for years, finally breaking free. Tears streamed down her face as Diane wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Behind them, Tank felt his own eyes burn hot, and he pressed a kiss to the top of Liam's small head, holding him just a little tighter against his heart. The afternoon sun broke through the clouds as they stepped outside, and for a moment, everyone just stood there, blinking in the light like they'd forgotten what it looked like. Then the noise started. Big Mike let out a whoop that echoed off the courthouse steps, throwing his arms around Preacher, who allowed himself an actual smile, the first real one anyone had seen on him in weeks. Diesel pulled Sarah into a hug so big it lifted her off her feet, spinning her once before setting her back down, both of them laughing. "You did it," Diesel said, his voice thick. "You did it, girl." "We did it," Sarah corrected, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "All of us." Tank stood a little apart from the crowd, Lily now in his arms, having traded off with Liam somewhere on the courthouse steps without even thinking about it. She was awake now, her dark eyes wide and curious, one small fist wrapped around his finger like she'd never let go. He looked down at her and felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been sealed shut for 11 years. Hope. That's what this was. He'd almost forgotten the shape of it. Sarah broke away from Diesel and walked over to him, still crying, still laughing, and threw her arms around him and Lily both, careful not to squeeze too hard. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder. "Thank you for not saying no that night." Tank cleared his throat, rough with something he didn't have words for. "Wasn't gonna let anything happen to these babies. Or you." "I know that now," Sarah said, pulling back to look at him. "I don't think I really believed anybody could be that kind. Not anymore. Craig took that from me, the believing part. You gave it back." Behind them, the club had turned the parking lot into something like a block party. Someone had produced a cooler from the back of a truck, cans of soda passed around since it was barely 2 in the afternoon, and half the guys still had their bikes to ride home. Preacher was already talking case strategy with Diane Reyes, the two of them huddled by her car, but even he kept glancing over at Sarah and the twins with something soft in his eyes. "Look at this," Big Mike said, coming up beside Tank and nudging him with an elbow the size of a ham hock. "Tank Morrison rocking a baby in a parking lot. Never thought I'd see the day." "Shut up, Mike." "I'm serious. You're glowing, man. Like a proud papa." Tank felt his face go hot, but he didn't argue. Maybe Mike was right. Maybe that's exactly what this felt like. Liam started fussing in Sarah's arms, and she bounced him gently, humming some tune under her breath, something Tank recognized as the same lullaby Diesel had been butchering for weeks now in the clubhouse garage. Diesel caught the tune too and grinned wide, pointing at Sarah like she'd stolen his signature move. "She's got my song," he said to no one in particular. "I taught her my song." "You didn't teach anybody anything," Preacher called over. "You just hummed it wrong enough times that it stuck." The group laughed. That easy laughter that comes after fear finally lets go of a body, and for a moment the whole parking lot felt light, felt free, felt like the beginning of something good instead of the end of something terrible. Tank looked down at Lily again. She'd found her thumb and was gumming at it happily, watching the chaos around her with the calm curiosity only babies seem to manage no matter what's happening. "You hear that?" he murmured to her, quiet enough that only she could hear. "That's what safe sounds like. Get used to it." He didn't know it yet, standing there in the weak afternoon sun with a baby against his chest and his brothers laughing around him. But this was the last easy breath he'd take for a long while. A shadow moved between two parked cars. Tank's head turned on instinct, the way it always did, some old soldier's habit that had never quite worn off no matter how many years passed. And there, stepping out from behind a gray sedan, was Craig Dalton, his uniform gone, his face twisted into something raw and wrong, something with nothing left to lose. There was a gun in his hand. "Get down!" Tank roared, already moving, already shoving Sarah hard toward the courthouse steps with his free arm, curling his body around Lily as the world seemed to slow and speed up all at once. The gunshot cracked through the parking lot like thunder. Screaming. That was the first thing. Somewhere behind him, Sarah was screaming his name and Lily was crying against his chest, that thin, high wail of a baby who felt the world tilt wrong. Tank hit the ground hard, his shoulder taking the worst of it, but he'd twisted his body as he fell, curling around the baby like a shell, making sure his back and not her small frame took whatever came next. Pain bloomed hot and sudden along his side, a burning that didn't make sense yet, that his brain hadn't caught up to. "Tank's hit!" someone bellowed. Big Mike's voice, cracking with something between rage and terror. The parking lot exploded into motion. Diesel was the first to reach Dalton, closing the distance in 3 long strides before the man could get off a second shot. He hit Dalton like a freight train, wrapping him up and driving him into the side of a parked car with a crunch of metal and glass. The gun skittered across the asphalt, spinning to a stop under a pickup truck. Big Mike was right behind him, grabbing Dalton's arm and wrenching it up behind his back with a shout of pure fury. "You son of a boo!" Mike roared, slamming Dalton face first onto the hood of the car. "You shot him! You shot Tank!" Dalton thrashed, screaming something incoherent, spit flying from his mouth, but there were too many of them now. Preacher had abandoned Diane Reyes mid-sentence and was already there, pinning Dalton's legs, his voice cold and controlled even as his hands shook with adrenaline. "Stay down," Preacher said, low and hard. "Stay down, or I swear to God." Dalton stopped fighting. Maybe it was the weight of 4 grown men on top of him. Maybe it was finally understanding, in some small broken corner of his mind, that it was over. Either way, he went still, breathing hard into the hood of the car, muttering something that sounded like an apology and a curse all tangled together. But none of that mattered to Tank. He was on his back now. Lily still clutched against his chest, her small face red and screaming, but unhurt, thank God, unhurt. Tank's hand pressed against his side on pure instinct, and when he pulled it away, it came back slick and red. Oh God, Tank. Sarah was there, dropping to her knees beside him, Liam still in one arm, her other hand hovering over Tank like she didn't know where it was safe to touch. Stay with me, okay?" "Take her," Tank said, or tried to say, his voice coming out thinner than he meant it to. He was looking at Lily, still wrapped against him, still crying. "Take the baby, Sarah." Sarah's hands were shaking so hard she could barely manage it, but she got Lily free, cradling both twins against her chest, her face white as paper, tears streaming down without her seeming to notice. "Somebody call 911!" Big Mike was shouting, though 3 people already had their phones out, hands trembling as they gave the address to dispatchers. "Tank, hey, look at me, brother, look at me!" Tank's eyes were getting heavy. That was strange. He wasn't tired. He'd just been standing there a minute ago, hadn't he? Holding a baby in the sun. He tried to say something, tried to tell Mike he was fine. It was nothing, just a scratch, but the words wouldn't come together right, and the gray sky above him seemed to swim and blur at the edges. "Don't you dare," Sarah said, her voice fierce through her tears, kneeling close, one hand pressed flat against his chest, like she could hold him together through willpower alone. "Don't you dare close your eyes. You hear me? These babies need their Uncle Tank. I need you. Don't you dare leave us now." The sirens started somewhere in the distance, faint at first, then closer, growing louder and louder until they filled the whole parking lot, red and blue lights bouncing off the courthouse windows. Paramedics burst through the crowd of bikers, pushing them back, kneeling over Tank with quick, practiced hands, cutting his shirt, pressing gauze hard against the wound, calling out numbers Sarah didn't understand. "We got a pulse, but it's weak. Let's move, let's move!" They lifted him onto a stretcher, and Sarah stood frozen, both twins wailing in her arms, watching as they wheeled him toward the open doors of the ambulance, its lights spinning silently against the gray afternoon sky. "Tank!" she screamed, taking a step forward before Preacher's hand caught her shoulder, gentle but firm. "Let them work," he said, his voice breaking despite himself. "Let them work, Sarah." The ambulance doors slammed shut. The siren wailed to life, and the vehicle tore out of the parking lot, leaving Sarah standing there in the sudden quiet, clutching her babies, watching the taillights disappear down the street, praying to a God she wasn't sure was listening anymore. The waiting room smelled like old coffee and bleach. Sarah sat in a plastic chair that had gone cold hours ago, Lily asleep against one shoulder, Liam fussing softly against the other. Her arms ached, her eyes burned, but she didn't move, because moving felt like giving up hope, and she wasn't ready to do that. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Big Mike stood by the window, his huge arms crossed, his eyes fixed on the parking lot outside, like he could will an update into existence just by staring hard enough. Diesel sat across from Sarah, elbows on his knees, head down, quiet in a way that didn't suit him. Preacher paced. He'd been pacing for almost an hour, his boots making the same soft path across the tile, back and forth, like the motion itself was a kind of prayer. Nobody spoke much. There wasn't much to say. They'd said it all already, in different ways, in the hours since they'd arrived. He's strong. He's tough. He's Tank. He's been through worse. But the words had worn thin, and now they just sat in the heavy silence, waiting. A doctor came through the double doors around midnight. Sarah recognized the walk before she saw the face, the slow, careful steps of someone about to deliver news they didn't want to give. Everyone stood at once. "He's out of surgery," the doctor said, and Sarah's whole body sagged with relief before the doctor kept talking. "But I won't lie to you. It was bad. The bullet did a lot of damage. We stopped the bleeding, but he lost a significant amount of blood before he got here, and his body is under a lot of stress. The next 24 hours are critical." "Critical how?" Big Mike asked, his voice rough. "Critical as in, we don't know yet," the doctor said gently. "He's strong. That's in his favor. But I can't promise you anything right now. I'm sorry." The doctor left. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Diesel sat back down hard, dragging a hand over his face. Preacher stopped pacing and stared at the doors like he might follow the doctor through them and demand better news. A different answer, something more solid to hold on to. Sarah sat back down too, slowly, careful not to wake Lily, careful not to squeeze Liam too tight even though every instinct in her told her to hold both babies as close as she possibly could. The hours crawled by after that. Nurses came and went. Someone brought coffee that nobody drank. Big Mike called his wife, his voice low and cracking as he explained what happened, and when he hung up, he sat with his head in his hands for a long time. Around 2 a.m, Preacher finally sat down next to Sarah. He didn't say anything at first. He just sat there, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, solid and steady in a way that helped, even though nothing about the night felt steady at all. "He talked about your sister," Sarah said quietly, not looking at him. "Angela. He told me about her. About how he wasn't there when she needed him." Preacher nodded slowly. "He carries that every day. Has for years." "He wasn't going to let that happen again," Sarah said. "That's why he did what he did. Jumped in front of that gun without even thinking about it." "That's Tank," Preacher said simply. "He shows up every time, no matter what it costs him." Sarah looked down at Liam, who had finally stopped fussing and drifted into an uneasy sleep against her chest, his tiny fist curled against her collarbone. She thought about the man who had opened his shop door on a rainy night and taken 2 babies from a stranger without asking a single question. She thought about grease-stained hands mixing formula, about a rough voice humming lullabies off-key, about how in just a few weeks this man had become something she never expected to find again after everything Craig had taken from her. Family. Safety. Someone who showed up. The night stretched on, long and silent except for the occasional beep of machines down the hall and the soft shuffle of nurses' shoes on tile. Sarah closed her eyes, resting her cheek against the top of Liam's head, breathing in the warm baby smell of him, and let the exhaustion pull at her even as fear kept her from truly sleeping. Please, she thought, the word forming over and over in her mind like a heartbeat. Please don't take him too. Please let him stay. We need him. I need him. Outside the window, the sky stayed dark, giving no answers, offering nothing but the long wait until morning. Morning came gray and slow, and with it came a strange new rhythm. Sarah learned the schedule of the hospital without meaning to. Shift change at 7, coffee cart at 8:30. The nurse with the kind eyes who checked on Tank every 2 hours and always gave Sarah a small nod on her way past, like she understood without needing to ask. The club brothers took turns, but none of them left for long. Big Mike went home to shower and came back within the hour, smelling like soap and worry. Diesel brought a duffel bag of clothes for everyone and a case of bottled water because that was the kind of thing he could control when nothing else made sense. They told stories. Somebody always seemed to have one. You know, he fixed my truck for free once, Big Mike said on the second morning, holding a cup of vending machine coffee he wasn't drinking. Wouldn't take a dime. Told me to buy my kid a birthday present instead. Never said a word about it again. I only found out because my wife saw the receipt he threw away. Diesel laughed, low and rough. That's Tank. Acts like he don't care about nothing, then does something like that and pretends it never happened. He drove 4 hours once to bring a stranded prospect home, Preacher added, sitting with his hands folded like he was still deciding whether to believe his own memory. Didn't even like the kid. Said it wasn't about liking him. Said it was about doing right. Sarah listened to all of it, rocking Liam gently against her shoulder while Lily slept in the carrier at her feet. Every story added another piece to the man she had only known for a few weeks, but who had already changed the shape of her whole life. She thought about how strange it was that fear had brought her to his door, and somehow, in the middle of all that fear, she had found this. A room full of tired, worried men who loved a gruff mechanic so much they couldn't leave his side. The television in the corner of the waiting room stayed on low volume, tuned to the local news, and it was Preacher who noticed first. "Turn that up," he said sharply. Big Mike grabbed the remote. Craig Dalton's mugshot filled the screen, unshaven, eyes hollow with fury even in a photograph. The reporter's voice was calm and clear. Local police officer Craig Dalton has been formally charged with attempted murder, corruption, and fraud, following an investigation that began after a violent incident outside the county courthouse. Sources say the charges stem from a pattern of abuse of police authority, including illegal surveillance and falsified adoption records. Sarah's breath caught. She stared at the screen, at the face that had haunted her for years, now reduced to a photograph on a news broadcast, stripped of the badge and the power that had let him control her for so long. "It's over," she whispered. "It's really over." Preacher put a hand on her shoulder. "The part with him is over. Now we just need Tank." She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, careful not to disturb Liam. The third day arrived slow and heavy, the waiting room filled with the same tired faces, the same cold coffee, the same fear that had started to feel like a permanent weight in Sarah's chest. She had barely slept, catching a few minutes here and there in the plastic chair, waking each time to check that both twins were still breathing, still safe, still there. Around noon, the double doors opened, and the same doctor from before walked through. But this time, his steps were different. Lighter, Sarah noticed it before he even said a word, and something in her chest loosened just slightly. "He's stable," the doctor said, and the words hit the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. "His body responded well overnight. The infection risk has passed, and his vitals have been strong for the last 12 hours. Barring anything unexpected, I expect a full recovery." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Big Mike let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and grabbed Diesel in a crushing hug. Preacher dropped his head into his hands, shoulders shaking with relief he didn't bother hiding. Sarah stood, clutching Liam close, tears streaming freely down her face as the tension of 3 long days finally broke apart inside her. "He's going to be okay," she said over and over, like she needed to hear it out loud to believe it. "He's going to be okay." The waiting room, quiet and heavy for so long, erupted into noise. Laughter, crying, Big Mike hugging every single person within reach, including a very startled nurse walking by with a clipboard. Tank's eyes opened slowly, like they were fighting through fog to get there. The ceiling above him was white and blurry, and for a moment, he didn't know where he was. Then the pain came, a dull ache along his side, and the memory followed right behind it. The parking lot. The gun. Sarah's face pale with terror. He remembered pushing her down, remembered the sharp burn of something hitting him, and then nothing. He blinked hard, trying to clear his vision, and slowly the room came into focus. Sarah was sitting in a chair pulled right up next to the bed, close enough that her knee almost touched the mattress. She held Liam against her chest, and Lily was asleep in a carrier at her feet. Her eyes were red and swollen, like she'd been crying for days, but when she saw him blink, saw him actually looking at her, her whole face changed. "Tank," she breathed, like his name was something fragile. Big Mike was on his feet in an instant, nearly knocking over a chair. "He's awake! Somebody get the doctor!" Diesel, standing by the window with his arms crossed, turned so fast he almost dropped the coffee in his hand. His face, usually hard as stone, cracked wide open into something Tank had never seen on him before. Pure relief. Preacher stepped closer to the bed, his hand resting gently on the metal rail, like he needed to touch something solid to believe it was real. "You scared the hell out of us, brother," he said, voice thick. Tank tried to speak, but his throat was dry and his voice came out cracked and rough. "Water," he managed. Sarah shifted Liam carefully to one arm and reached for the cup on the tray beside the bed, holding the straw to his lips. He drank slowly, feeling the coolness spread through his chest, and when he finally looked up at her again, he saw the tears sliding down her cheeks even as she smiled. "You're really awake," she whispered. "Looks like it," Tank rasped, and the corner of his mouth twitched up into something close to a smile. Big Mike laughed, a big booming sound that filled the room, and clapped Diesel on the back hard enough to make him stumble. "Look at him, cracking jokes already! Man gets shot and he's still got that smart mouth." "Somebody's got to keep you idiots in line," Tank muttered, and even that small effort left him tired, but it felt good. It felt like proof he was still here. The doctor came in a few minutes later, checking monitors, asking questions, shining a light in his eyes that made Tank wince. Everyone stepped back to give him room, but nobody left. Preacher stood near the door with his arms crossed, watching every move like a hawk. Diesel hovered by the window, unable to sit still. Big Mike paced at the foot of the bed, muttering thanks under his breath every few seconds like a prayer he couldn't stop repeating. When the doctor finally stepped out, satisfied and promising to check back soon, the room settled into a quiet that felt different from before. Not heavy anymore. Just peaceful. Sarah shifted closer, still holding Liam, and reached out to take Tank's hand in hers. Her fingers were small against his rough, scarred knuckles, but her grip was steady. "Tank," she said softly, her voice trembling with everything she had been carrying for days. "You saved us. You gave up everything, your safety, your life, to protect my babies. I don't know how I'll ever repay you for that." Tank looked at her, then down at Liam's tiny face pressed against her shoulder, and something in his chest loosened, something that had been tight and closed off for years. "You don't owe me nothing," he said, his voice still groggy but steady enough to mean it. "Those babies," he paused, glancing toward Lily sleeping peacefully in her carrier. "They gave me something to fight for. First time in a long while I had a reason to open my eyes again." Sarah's tears fell freely now, but she was smiling through them, holding his hand tighter. "We're not going anywhere," she whispered. "Not after everything you did for us." Tank squeezed her hand back, weak but sure, and for the first time in years he felt like maybe, just maybe, he had found something worth all the pain. A family. Not the one he had lost, but one he had built piece by piece without ever meaning to. The sun hung warm and golden over the clubhouse parking lot, the kind of light that made everything look softer than it was. Someone had strung up paper streamers between two motorcycles, and a banner made from an old bedsheet stretched across the garage doors. Big Mike's wife had painted it in bright red letters, "Welcome home, Tank." Tables had been dragged out from the clubhouse and covered with checkered cloths. There were burgers on the grill, a cooler full of soda for the kids and beer for the grown-ups, and 3 different kinds of potato salad because nobody could agree on whose recipe was best. Kids from the neighborhood ran between the tables, and a couple of dogs chased a frisbee across the cracked asphalt. Tank stood near the grill, a spatula in his hand, feeling the sun on his face like it was something new. 3 months since the hospital. 3 months of physical therapy, of Preacher driving him to appointments and grumbling the whole way, of Big Mike sneaking him extra desserts when the doctor wasn't looking. The scar along his side still pulled when he stretched too far, but the doctor said he'd healed about as well as anyone could hope for. A small miracle, they called it. Tank just called it lucky. He flipped a burger, and that was when he heard it. "Uncle Tank!" Lily came barreling across the lot on wobbly legs, her little sneakers slapping against the pavement, her arms already reaching up before she even got close. Liam wasn't far behind her, giggling so hard he nearly tripped over his own feet. They were walking now, really walking. Tank still couldn't quite believe it every time he saw it happen. He set down the spatula and crouched, wincing just slightly at the pull in his side, and caught both kids as they crashed into him. Lily wrapped her chubby arms around his neck, and Liam grabbed a fistful of his shirt, laughing that big, open laugh that only babies have, the kind that comes from somewhere pure and untouched by the world yet. "Whoa, whoa, easy there," Tank said, laughing himself, lifting them both up like it was nothing, even though his side ached with the effort. "You two are getting too big for this." "Again," Lily demanded, and Tank spun her around once, careful and slow, her laughter ringing out across the lot like a bell. From across the parking lot, Sarah watched with a cup of lemonade in her hand, and something in her chest swelled so big she thought it might burst right out of her. She set the cup down on the nearest table and clinked a fork against a beer bottle someone had left nearby, the sound cutting through the noise of the party. "Can I have everybody's attention for a second?" she called out. The chatter died down. Big Mike turned off the radio he'd rigged up by the garage. Preacher stepped closer, arms crossed, but his eyes soft. Diesel leaned against his bike, already looking like he knew what was coming and was ready to get emotional about it. Sarah walked over to where Tank stood, still holding Lily on one hip while Liam clung to his leg. She looked out at the crowd of leather vests and tattoos and scarred knuckles, the roughest-looking bunch of people anyone could imagine, and she felt nothing but safe. "A year ago," she started, her voice shaking just a little, "I walked into a motorcycle shop in the middle of a storm, carrying 2 babies and nothing else. I didn't have a plan. I just had fear, and I had 2 kids I'd have done anything to protect." She looked at Tank now, tears already gathering, but she kept going. "I didn't know this man. I didn't know any of you, but you didn't hesitate. You didn't ask questions. You just showed up, and you kept showing up every single day since." Her voice cracked, but she pushed through it. "Tank almost died protecting my babies. He gave everything he had for a family that wasn't even his, but I think I think maybe it was always his. Maybe it just took all of us a while to see it." She raised her cup toward him, and around the lot, the whole club raised whatever they were holding, beer bottles and soda cans and paper cups of lemonade. "To family," Sarah said. "The kind you're born into and the kind you find." "To family," the crowd echoed, voices rough and warm all at once, glasses clinking together in the golden afternoon light. Tank stood there with a child on each hip, surrounded by the loudest, roughest, most loyal group of people he'd ever known, and he felt something settle deep inside his chest, something that had been broken since the day he lost Angela. He finally had it back, the thing he thought was gone forever. He had a family. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.